Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7 here on Broadcasting Scotland. My name's Kenny McBride and I'm joined this evening by, I think, the same guest we had last Wednesday night. Firstly, by Richard Thomson, the MP for Gordon. Richard, how are you this evening?
Very well, thanks, Kenny. How are you?
I'm not bad. And on the other side of me, we have writer and academic Effie Samara. Effie, how are you doing today?
I'm not too bad, thank you, Kenny.
Excellent. Well, we start this evening, as we always do, with our coronavirus statistics update. And as of 2 p.m. today, a total of 407,223 people in Scotland have been tested through NHS Scotland labs and UK Government regional testing centres. Of these, 388,397 were confirmed negative, 19,126 were positive. There are 47 new confirmed cases of COVID-19 in Scotland today, but once again, it's another day with no new reported deaths. This will of course be an underestimate of the total number of cases, as not everyone with the virus will necessarily display symptoms and not everybody will necessarily get themselves tested. We do again urge you, if you show any symptoms, please book a test as quickly as you can. Of the people who have tested positive, 265 were in hospital last night, 3 of whom were in intensive care. The number of patients in Scotland who have died from complications caused by the coronavirus infection remains at 2,491. This number only includes those who have died in hospital, having received a positive test for the virus. And the latest UK daily figures available show that 46,706 patients who tested positive for COVID-19 have sadly died from their illness, an increase of 77 since yesterday. This number refers to deaths in all settings, not just those in hospitals. And a technical problem meant that figures for England and the whole of the UK were not published yesterday, but the update today shows that 55 people sadly died during the previous 24 hours. Also today, Deputy First Minister John Swinney announced that staff in schools and nurseries could get coronavirus tests on demand if they suspected any risk of contact, even if they are showing no symptoms. So before we go any further, I would just like to remind you, if you want to join the conversation here on Scotland at 7, you can do so by following us on Twitter at BroadcastScot and using the hashtag Scotland at 7. That's hashtag Scotland AT and the number 7. As you can see, we'll be flashing some of those tweets up on the screen throughout the show. But our first story, as it's Wednesday, we also have the NRS report today. So as at the 9th of August, 4,213 deaths have been registered in Scotland where the novel coronavirus was mentioned on the death certificate, according to statistics published by National Records of Scotland today. Between the 3rd and the 9th of August, 5 deaths were registered that mentioned COVID-19 on the death certificate, representing a decrease of 2 from last week. This is the lowest weekly total of deaths involving COVID-19 since the first death was recorded in early March. Updated analysis covering the period from the 1st of March to the 31st of July on mortality by occupation, deprivation, pre-existing conditions and by urban and rural areas has also been published today. The key findings are very similar to those published last month for the period from the 1st of March to the 30th of June and show that, adjusting for age, people in the most deprived areas were twice as likely to die with COVID-19 than those living in the least deprived areas. Adjusting for age, people living in larger urban areas were more than 4 times more likely to die with COVID-19 than those in more rural locations. And of those who died with COVID-19 in March to July, 92% had at least one pre-existing condition. The most common pre-existing condition among those who died with COVID-19 was dementia and Alzheimer's disease, representing 31% of all COVID-19 related deaths. But our first news story for today, 3 people have died and several more were seriously injured when a train derailed this morning near Stonehaven. First Minister Nicola Sturgeon has declared a major incident. 2 air ambulances and about 30 emergency services vehicles have been spotted near the scene of the accident. This is an extremely serious incident. I've had an initial report from Network Rail and the emergency services and I'm being kept updated. All my thoughts are with those involved. Although details are still emerging, I am afraid to say there are early reports of serious injuries, Sturgeon said earlier today. British Transport Police confirmed later this afternoon that 3 people had died in the incident. And Richard, if I can come to you first, obviously Stonehaven isn't your constituency, but I always found when I was in Aberdeen, it's like the world's biggest village. Something in Stonehaven still affects you, even if you're in the city. And obviously people travelling on this train, some of them will have been Aberdonians. How are people in Aberdeen and Aberdeenshire feeling today after this accident?
Well, obviously, full details are still to emerge, and we've yet to find out who was the identities of those who were injured and killed. And obviously, our thoughts are very much with them and their loved ones at this time. But this reaction overwhelmingly is one of shock, the same as it is anywhere else. I think it's been about 13 years since there was last a fatality involving a train like this. I heard on the radio in the car this afternoon. We regard rail as being one of the safest forms of transport there is, and that's probably why it's all the more shocking when an incident like this happens. But it's a very, very popular mode of travel for people heading out of Aberdeen, and particularly at that time in the morning. You imagine that there were people looking to go to work. It was a service to Glasgow, perhaps connecting on to other places. But I mean, looking at the images that emerged this afternoon, I mean, in the morning, at lunchtime, you could see the video images of the smoke rising, and you knew this wasn't just a derailment. It was obviously much, much worse. And I think that has been, that has been verified by the aerial images that have been shown in the last few hours, where you can see carriages on top of one another, one down an embankment, and I think you can see evidence of the fire that caused the smoke as well. So obviously we wouldn't do to speculate. The Rail Accident Investigation Board will be on site very soon to conduct a full investigation, but absolutely a horrible incident, harrowing for all concerned, and for the emergency service workers who had to get into what was a very, very difficult part of the countryside to get into to perform an operation like that. But thoughts have to be very, very much with those who have been who have lost loved ones or who have had loved ones injured, and of course everyone on the train.
Yeah, absolutely. Michael Matheson, the Transport Minister, has said that he's spoken to the emergency services. He said he wanted to thank all the engineers and emergency services who are responding to the incident and the challenging conditions they are dealing with at this time as well. Obviously, sending his best wishes to all the families involved. But we move on now, and heavy rain and thunderstorms have caused travel disruption and flooding across Scotland. Train passengers and motorists faced disruption due to the conditions this morning. ScotRail tweeted that due to extremely heavy rain and flooding on the railway, services across the country have been delayed or cancelled. Some reports suggest flooding may have played a role in the Stonehaven incident as well. The Scottish Government's Resilience Room is also now operational, and Nicola Sturgeon said she will convene a meeting this afternoon. Passengers were advised to check before travelling and consider alternative transport where possible. On the roads, some vehicles were recovered after they were abandoned amid flooding on the M8, which was partly closed for a time but later reopened. Scottish Fire and Rescue Service said it had been called to multiple reports of flooding in Perthshire, with many domestic properties affected, and authorities in Fife and Perth and Kinross warned drivers of significant road closures due to flooding. BT's incident management team said a major outage at an exchange in Edinburgh caused by the weather was affecting about 100,000 customers' broadband on BT, EE and PlusNet in the city and the surrounding area. The Met Office has issued a yellow warning of thunderstorms for the eastern half of Scotland, which remains in force until midnight tonight. It warned that some places are likely to see further severe thunderstorms, but with significant uncertainty in location and timing. The warning covers Central, Tayside and Fife, Angus, Clackmannanshire, Dundee, Falkirk, Fife, Perth and Kinross and Stirling. Effie, these massive downpours causing serious floods in significant parts of the country in the height of summer. Is this some of the kind of extreme weather events that we just have to expect more of as climate change really takes hold?
I would agree with you, Kenny. I think there's plenty of evidence that climate change is definitely happening, and that definitely going forward, obviously, in addition to COVID, which is something that we urgently need to be dealing with right now as a matter of life and death, climate change cannot be put to one side. It needs to be researched, and it needs to be actioned on, not simply as a theory or a possibility. We see it, we witness it, it's actually happening. And even on a purely anecdotal basis, if you talk to people from different generations, you will get really the imagistic differences of what sometimes people will refer to as the way it used to be. And what we're witnessing right now. And obviously, going on purely scientific research, what's happening in the Antarctica, the melting of the ice, the thinning of different layers of the atmosphere, and what we're seeing, as you say, even in our urban environments on a daily basis. So it is an emergency, and I don't think there is really much room for climate change deniers to be on their previous discourse. They really need to read and inform themselves, and we all need to act on this.
And Richard, we may have to accept that as our climate changes, as our weather patterns change, that flooding is going to be more and more of a problem. What can government do to try and mitigate some of the problems that people are facing now?
Well, government has acted in terms of planning, for one thing. So it's I think it's now part of Scottish planning policy that they can only build on land that is 1 in 400 year risk of flood rather than 1 in 200 as it was previously. But I think that the problem we have to deal with is, as Effie says, more extreme weather events seem to be hitting us. But it's very, very difficult to engineer your way out of that problem in terms of building flood defences. I mean, Stonehaven was hit today by some pretty bad flooding. A lot of businesses affected there. There's a flood prevention scheme underway in Stonehaven, which will cope with a lot. But sometimes when you've just got that amount of water falling from the sky in that short period of time, very little is going to solve it. Now, a few years ago, I was a co-leader of Aberdeenshire Council, and we had some horrendous floods after days and days of rain, and the water just eventually came straight off the hills and into the rivers with pretty predictable consequences. But I think in terms of dealing with this and trying to mitigate it, obviously we have to tackle our emissions and change the way we live our lives. But more flood prevention, I think, has got to do with planting trees and looking after the natural environment than it has to do with pouring concrete and trying to engineer your way out of it. That will be appropriate in some particular locations, but I think delaying the flow of water down from hills into river systems is the best way to solve some of the more catastrophic floods that we've seen recently. But if you're going to have a situation like we saw over the last 18, 24 hours with that amount of rainfall in that sort of length of time, in any area that's built up like your towns and cities, you're going to have a problem simply because the drains are not going to be able to cope. But I think planting trees has got more to do with sorting this and keeping existing gullies and drains open than pouring concrete and engineering our way out of it. But fundamentally, there's the macro issue there of the lives we lead and the consumption that we undertake, and that has to be factored in.
Aye, absolutely. We move on now, though, and a new poll shows that the SNP hold a commanding lead over opposition parties, and Scottish voters are continuing to put their trust in the party. The UKAV poll reported in the Times shows the SNP are set to secure another pro-independence majority at Holyrood, with 57% of voters set to back the party in May. Support for independence has also risen to 53%. The poll also shows the majority of Scots also back Nicola Sturgeon and her handling of the COVID-19 crisis, but have been far less convinced by the Tories, with Boris Johnson's approval ratings plummeting to minus 54. Effie, I don't know which of these stories to come to you on first. I think the 100-point gap between Nicola Sturgeon's approval rating and Boris Johnson's, I think, might feed in large part to the ratings for the SNP and for independence. What do you think?
Well, it's not even wide enough. I mean, Boris Johnson, one would wonder if there could ever be any support for him anywhere in the world for anything that he says or does or has said previously over the last 30 or 40 years. So he's a pretty easy target. But I mean, jokes aside, what's happening at the moment, I think, is to do with, firstly, a historical development of the concept of the Scottish nation. So going from the late 1600s and through to the Act of Union and the subsumption, if you like, of the Scottish identity under British identity, and the result of this, especially over the last 20 years in the Act of Devolution. So we've had that in 99 with great enthusiasm. And then what happened under David Cameron, where, we were promised all these Devo Max and what have you, and these amazing things that were going to happen, a lot of power and authority over Scottish decisions, which now has effectively, the Brexit decision has negated all of them. So it's obviously a historical outcome, but it's also in the present moment. What you have in Scotland is both real leadership, but at the same time, you have a lot of respect for a shared view of the world, public consultation, and listening to the citizens of Scotland and what we have to say. So there is, in contrast to what's happening in London, where there's a big authoritarian push, a very centralized, London-centric, Anglospheric view of the world. You have a big internationalist approach with a very capable government and a person, Nicola Sturgeon, at the helm of the movement, who has not failed through possibly what could be characterized as the most difficult and challenging period of anyone's premiership or leadership, which was the COVID crisis, with limited resources, and she handled this admirably. So people are informed, they stay informed, even going by, the latest situation, with the exam results and things like that, which was a nationwide issue, as we have seen coming back, results coming back from England and Wales. She literally went out with her team, supported by her team, and acted on this. Now, different people may have different ideas about what happened, and I'm not going to get into that. But this is someone who is very serious about not just leading, but also listening. And people can see this, not just nationally within Scotland, but also internationally. I'm not in the least bit surprised that this support is there, and I think that it will probably continue to grow.
And Richard, this is, kind of uncharted territory really for any party in the UK to be at 57%. Now, obviously, there's still a long time before the election. Do you feel like this is a lead that the SNP can hold on to or even build on by the time of the election comes around?
Yeah, I think what the SNP would be wise to do is to keep on doing what it's doing and not concern itself overly much with these figures. I mean, the immediate, the sceptical response would be to say that this has been blown up by satisfaction at the way that Nicola Sturgeon in particular, but the Scottish Government more generally, has dealt with COVID. And I think it would be foolish to think that all of that 57% will be made up of people who are completely satisfied with the SNP. I mean, there'll be a fair amount of support in there that's a bit grudging or it's borrowed. But I think it's certainly a reflection of the dismal state of the other parties in the Scottish Parliament. I mean, the Scottish Conservatives have been taking every shortcut they can think of to try and tarnish individual reputations or the government's reputation. It's as if they think that if they can get people to think badly of the Scottish government, that they'll automatically start to think well of the Scottish Conservatives. And I'm afraid politics just ain't like that. People are too wise to fall into that trap. And I think it's been interesting watching, Ruth Davidson come back to the fray. I mean, she beetled off 12 months ago with no compelling personalities in place to be potential ministers. The Ruth Davidson for First Minister thing was trampled into the mud. Her whole shtick about being a pro-European who had the Prime Minister's ear and who had all this great influence in London is obviously been shot to pieces. And now she's back as part of a double act with Douglas Ross, only with 12 months fewer to try and resolve that situation than she had at the time that she originally stood down. So, I think that a lot of people are backing the SNP right now because of clear competence and seeing the best government for Scotland. But what's undeniable is the shift that there's been to independence over the last few months. Now, I was always very, very hopeful that there was a key group in Scottish politics, and I really went out of my way to speak to this group when I was standing for election last year in Gordon. And those were people who voted no in 2014, but who voted Remain in the Brexit referendum in 2016. These were people who in 2014, who for very good reasons had voted for two unions, but were now being told that they could only have one. And I think it's actually taken Brexit to happen, or for all that we're in this withdrawal agreement period, for people to accept this is actually happening, and at the end of the withdrawal period it's not going to be pretty. And that has been what has shifted an awful lot of these voters across to give us the 53% support for independence. So I think that's tremendously encouraging. It has to be nurtured. It's there certainly to be built on, but I think it's a vindication of the approach of speaking out on Brexit, saying why this is bad for Scotland, trying to mitigate the worst effects of it. But every time those attempts to mitigate it are brushed off arrogantly by the Tories in Westminster, there's been more people have moved closer to that column of backing independence. And that's what we're starting to see feed through in those polling numbers.
Well, you have segued beautifully for me into our next story there, because the UK government has finally confirmed it will not attend a Holyrood evidence-taking session on its post-Brexit power grab plan, just half an hour before the meeting was due to begin. The Tories are running a 4-week consultation on the UK government plan to create a new internal market between the four nations at the end of the Brexit transition period, which has been described as the biggest power grab yet on the Scottish Parliament by the Constitutional Relations Secretary. In Holyrood, Labour, the Greens and the Lib Dem figures have criticised the plan, leaving Scottish Tories isolated in their support for it. Powers over food labelling, food manufacturing and hygiene, animal welfare, recycling and environmental matters could all be affected by the proposal, Michael Russell said. The UK government launched a consultation on the proposals running from July 16th to August 13th. Because it started during the Holyrood recess, it left MSPs with just one possible day to take evidence before the consultation ends. However, Tory ministers failed to confirm whether or not they would attend an evidence-giving session. Today, one day before the consultation finishes, the Tory government finally notified Holyrood that it would not be attending. Patrick Harvie, MSP, said, "The Tory government's internal market proposals would strip the Scottish Parliament of its legislative power, handing a veto on any Scottish Parliament bill to unelected Whitehall bureaucrats. The plan hatched by Alok Sharma would destroy the devolution settlement as we know it, and the fact that UK ministers won't even discuss the bill with MSPs says it all about their contempt for Scotland. It's no wonder that poll after poll shows an increase in support for independence. I welcome the latest poll published today, which shows that support for Scotland to take its future into its own hands is as high as it has ever been. It's clear that the people of Scotland are ready to reject the incompetent and arrogant UK government and take the opportunity of independence to build a fairer, healthier Scotland." That's quite a speech we've managed to read out there from Patrick Harvie. But Effie, do you think, as Richard says, it is the fact that people had to see the damage from Brexit happening before they would be ready to cross the Rubicon onto supporting independence?
Well, I'll let you into a secret, Kenny. I was a no voter in 2014. So I hope the producer listening into this now, I won't be exiled from Broadcasting Scotland, but this is the reality. So I have always been, if you like, as a New Scot, but the mother to a Scottish child, I've always been very aware of Scotland in my academic capacity, but I wanted, as Richard very aptly mentioned, I voted in. I was the supporter of the two unions. So one of the reasons, because I have European family, my dad is a European citizen, and my late mother at the time as well, I could not countenance the possibility of of Scotland being outside of the European Union. So that was a huge, big issue in people's thinking at the time. The moment Brexit happened, and Nicola Sturgeon came out, and I will never forget her speech on the steps of Bute House. My dad was driving, I can't remember where we were going, and I saw a tear in his eye, and he's not a very emotional man in terms of manifesting himself like this. So it was almost like a combination between logic, the lunacy of Brexit, and not Nicholas personally, but the Scottish government, the Scottish people's readiness to come out and say, we are not part of this. So for some of us, it was almost an automatic conversion. Other people took a longer time. And I will echo Richard in saying, as the Brexit crash is about to unfold, it's unfolding on a daily basis. The hope is that more people will see the reality of this and will see where their interests lie. As you know, I'm very analytical, so I watch proceedings and the way things unfold pretty much on a daily basis, and I am critical when I need to be and when I want to be. But the reality is that we have an authoritarian government in London. England is not what it was, even under Thatcher, who was a very hated person by a lot of England as well at the time. I was a child and I remember that vividly. But we have moved now. These are dangerous ideologues who have formed a core group of literally inflicting damage on the country to pursue their own personal interests. And these do not at all include Scotland. And you did mention how Holyrood ministers were excluded from what is essentially a discussion on the Brexit, on the future post Brexit. So this will impact people's lives, be it agriculture, standards, pharmaceuticals, education, research, medicine, all of this. Yeah. And Scottish people are wise.
And Richard, this kind of contempt that seems to have been shown to Scotland throughout the Brexit process, we've seen, Scottish MPs having to take the Westminster government to court in order to get Holyrood's status addressed, and then this just refusal to even come and speak to Holyrood committees. It doesn't seem like the best way to fight to save the precious union, does it?
Well, no. I mean, it was Napoleon said, don't interrupt your opponent when they're busy with a mistake, and Westminster's certainly making a lot of mistakes at this point in time. And they can talk the language of respect. Michael Gove's very eloquent. He can turn his lawyer, he can, like as Robert Burns said, the lawyer turned inside out, and he can wax lyrical about a respect agenda and be very, very emollient when he so chooses. But, those are just words. It's not hardwired into them. It's just not in their DNA to be respectful, because they don't have because the focus is London. And London is the capital as far as they're concerned. Westminster is the Parliament, that is the place that is sovereign, and everything else is secondary to that. And for all who make nice noises about being respectful towards Scotland and the Scottish government, if it stops them doing their trade deal, indeed anything else that they fancy, then they won't hesitate to assert that sovereignty. And, that's the whole point, the whole action that's come up in court again. It came up in court a few months ago over Brexit, that power devolved was essentially power retained. Now, I know that there's a lot of people in the Yes movement think that this is a power play by Westminster to try and shut down the Scottish Parliament. They're not that daft. They're not going to do that. But what they will not hesitate to do is to leave open ways of trying to clip Holyrood's wings, whether that's jumping in with legislation or whether it is simply driving a coach and horses through the principle that which is with the return of powers from Brussels, which is that which is not reserved is explicitly devolved. Mm-hmm. So we're going to see that sort of hardball coming up. But Holyrood's place in that is secure, even if not all of its powers necessarily the way it's allowed to exercise them necessarily will be. But again, that all feeds into next. And I think that genuine devolvers who are not yet supporters of independence, and there's an awful lot of them still out there, will be horrified that their vision of how a devolved Parliament could work within the Union, that its powers were effectively entrenched and secure, that is not the case. And I think, again, that being able to see that lived out in reality rather than in just what pro-independence campaigners say, but actually seeing that acted out in practice is going to be what, again, bumps that number up, 53-54% support for independence to levels that are even higher. But that is something that will build over the next few months.
Okay. Well, we move on now, and the UK government has come under renewed pressure to take bold action to protect jobs, people's livelihoods and the economy, as new statistics confirmed that the UK has officially entered into recession, its deepest on record and its first in more than a decade. In its findings, the Office for National Statistics highlighted that the UK's economy shrank by a record 20.4% between April and June, when lockdown measures were in force. The contraction was the worst of any G7 country in the 3 months to June so far. Despite the month of June seeing some growth of around 8.7%, the UK's GDP is still 17.2% smaller than it was in February. Separately, the ONS reported yesterday that nearly 750,000 jobs have been lost since the coronavirus lockdown began. And meanwhile, Scottish Economy Secretary Fiona Hislop announced £60 million for a youth guarantee to enable wider access to employment, education and training for young people. Additional support for young people was a key recommendation of the advisory group on economic recovery. So I'll come to you first on this, Richard. This crisis that we've seen in the economy is potentially only going to get worse. We spoke just before the show started about jobs under threat in your constituency. And it does seem likely that we're going to see more of that. What should the UK government be doing to protect more jobs and more industries?
Well, bluntly, it shouldn't be taking away the furlough scheme. It seems to be utterly daft that the UK government would have stepped into the extent that it did. Not that Scotland couldn't have done that by itself with the appropriate powers. Let's get that in there and make that very abundantly. But to put in all that effort to try and save jobs, I'd like it, and then to take it away makes no sense. I liken it to carrying a whole lot of delicate crystal figures on a tray and managing to get across and once you get to the other side of the room, just dropping it because you can't be bothered anymore. It makes absolutely no sense for the Chancellor to behave like that. Now, we all know that not every job can be saved, not every industry is going to recover. That's why it needs a sectoral approach, and it needs that intelligent approach to withdraw that support when it's able to be withdrawn as demand returns, because demand is returning, but it's going to be very delicate and it's going to be very patchy. Now, there's clearly not going to be a V-shaped recovery in the economy, but economies tend to return back to something approaching trend growth. And we've seen as lockdown has eased off and as things have moved back to some sort of the normality that there was before, that the economy has begun to pick up, for all that there is still a big drop-off in where it was. But maintaining furlough, maintaining government support for demand. Removing it as and when sectors are able to support themselves is important. But also the big bit for me that's really missing in everything that the Chancellor's done in terms of the lack of any kind of stimulus package. Germany, Europe, the stimulus package, a particular investment in the hydrogen economy and the green industrial revolution. We're not seeing anything like that. We see talk about a sector deal for the North East to help with that move into the hydrogen economy, and a sector deal to preserve jobs and effect that just transition that we need, particularly in the North East of Scotland. But that investment just hasn't been put up there yet. And, clearly, the government can borrow great amounts. It's not going to be an outlier if it was to choose to do that. But it's that real fiscal stimulus in terms of the economy of the future, rather than minimising the damage in the present, which is all about to be undone in a lot of cases when the Chancellor takes it away. Those are the two things that are missing. He needs to make that transition from support for the present to investing in the future, and not cutting away the present support without putting anything in the future. I think it needs it needs that investment for the future, that major stimulus, and the careful withdrawal sector by sector of the furlough support. That's what he's missing, and that's going to make this much worse than it needs to be.
Well, we turn to the United States now, and Joe Biden yesterday named California Senator Kamala Harris as his running mate to face President Donald Trump and Vice President Mike Pence in November's general election. Harris is a former California Attorney General who earned a reputation as an aggressive prosecutor before being elected to the US Senate in 2017. She is only the third woman in history to be nominated to the presidential ticket of a major party, and is the first woman of either Black or South Asian heritage through her Jamaican American father and Tamil American mother. Within minutes of Biden's announcement yesterday, Trump had called Harris nasty, horrible, and disrespectful, while his campaign painted her as an extremist who would yank the moderate Biden to the left. However, there is little evidence at the moment that suggests that the public views Harris views Harris as a radical. In fact, she's more liked by Republicans than Biden, according to a poll conducted on August 10th and 11th, just before she was announced as Biden's pick. The poll showed that 21% of registered Republican voters have a favourable view of Harris, compared to 13% who had a similar opinion of Biden. Effie, coming to you first, with the current poll lead that Joe Biden has, this does look like there is maybe the strongest chance yet of a woman being elected to one of the high offices of state in the United States. Is this good news for you?
Well, it's fantastic news. I tweeted last night. I said America has just got an awful lot better. So there's obviously, the election has not happened, so we must not get too hopeful in just presuming that things are going to go in a certain way, and that Trump will be successfully fumigated out of the White House, because he has threatened not to abide by whatever the election, unless it's in his favor, which we know now it probably won't be. Now, Harris is a brilliant choice. It's not just her track record, Kenny, and we could go on and talk about this for a while. And this is also to do with, as you say, the symbolism of a Black woman of Indian and Jamaican heritage, and also a very accomplished prosecutor and attorney general. Now, this is someone who would easily be perceived as a little bit of a threat to the more centrist views in America, because of the views she has taken on, for example, prosecuting marijuana, truancy, gun control, also ensuring that she not one believe advocated for asked for the death penalty, even in the very sensitive case when a policeman had been murdered, which was part of her cases at the time when she was Attorney General. So she's a big supporter of possibly the abolition of the death penalty in America, which is a very, very contentious subject. But this is someone who embodies a progressive view in America. She has spoken against the exploitation of women. She has spoken against prostitution. She has spoken against student debt. So this is someone who will dare to go, I hope and believe, to the left of Biden. And she's young, so she can easily be hoping to build on that record and hopefully, as vice president, go on to the presidency after Biden. So yes, absolutely, very, very good news.
Yeah. Well, we come back to Scotland now, and the Scottish Greens have welcomed the news that citizens' assemblies are due to resume their activity. The Assembly was suspended during the coronavirus crisis, but Constitution Secretary Michael Russell confirmed it will resume in an online format from today. Commenting, Scottish Green co-leader Lorna Slater said, "I'm pleased the Citizens' Assembly is to resume its work, and it's absolutely crucial that its voice is heard in the coming months. I've enjoyed meeting with and listening to the members of the Assembly. It's a great opportunity to hear from working class women and other groups who normally don't get a say in politics. That's why the Assembly needs to be more than just another Scottish Government consultation. As we plan a recovery from the COVID-19 crisis, its voice will provide a vital counterweight to the corporate interests calling for a swift return to business as usual that serves no one but themselves." So, Richard, this is obviously good news that these kind of events can get back to something approaching normal. What do you expect these citizens' assemblies to come out with? Do you think, as Lorna Slater says, that it might be a somewhat more radical set of ideas than the Scottish Government has proposed on their own so far?
Well, potentially. I think they allow difficult or contentious issues to be explored. They can bring people together with different ideas and allow those ideas to be discussed in a manner which is more respectful and elevated in some cases than we manage in parliamentary or council debating chambers sometimes. So I think they're a tremendously positive thing, and I think what they do is they effectively give permission, if you like, to politicians to go further than they think that the public might actually wish to go on certain issues. But whether they're used to discuss matters about the Constitution or some of the wicked issues that you have in public policy, I think that engagement is good in itself. But one of the legacies of the 2014 independence referendum was that Scotland had one of the most engaged populaces when it comes to politics anywhere in the Western world, and that included the cohort of young people who were 16, 17 and getting their vote there for the first time. I think it would be a shame to not capitalise on that engagement and the comparatively high levels of interest that we have in public policy and the politics debate in Scotland. And if these citizens' assemblies can help us to have sometimes a more open and unguarded set of discussions, to not just leave things in the hands of the professional politicians, I think that's a good thing. I think it was Tony Benn said, politics is too important to be left to the politicians. I would like to think that the citizens' assemblies can demonstrate the proof of that adage.
Mm-hmm. Effie, do you hold under one banner the non-party campaign organizer? I don't know what happened there. Effie, do you have any thoughts on this? Is this something that can open up a new kind of participatory democracy for Scotland?
Absolutely. In fact, I was involved in an effort last year in 2019 to do with a participatory process which we initiated through the school, the College of Social Science at Glasgow University. What I wanted to just mention here very, very briefly is that these assemblies are obviously, it's a consultative process. It's not, they don't have legislative power. But in the first instance, the proposal was that 3 questions be asked of the participants, and they were very, very carefully selected to represent and reflect age, gender, and ethnicity, and economic class. So they were initially the questions were, what kind of country do you want Scotland to be? How can Scottish people overcome challenges, including Brexit? So that was actually mentioned in the paper, and what further work is needed. Uh, and the participants were to meet over several weekends to discuss these things, and the findings were to be presented to the Scottish Parliament. So we are talking about fairly broad questions. So the remit was broad, as opposed to perhaps some other countries. We've had citizens' assemblies in France where the remit was slightly smaller. For example, we had a climate assembly in Iceland. There was a different style. So these have been tested, these mini publics have been tested in other European democracies, and they have been shown to work. Scotland, again, within the United Kingdom, has been a pioneer in trying to institute these groups, these mini publics. And I'm very keen to see what happens hereafter, and to see what, when they do resume, what the reaction will be, obviously, given the added urgency of COVID. But they're an amazing process of shared inquiry, and we need to invest in them, starting from a very young people right to people in the most advanced of the most advanced age. Anyway, everyone must feel welcome to participate in a democracy. Otherwise, it's not that. We're doing very well. We can build on that.
Well, it is the glorious 12th, and today Scottish Green MSP Alison Johnson has called on the First Minister to end raptor persecution once and for all. Speaking at First Minister's questions, the Lothian MSP referenced the words of the late First Minister Donald Dewar, who described the persecution of birds of prey as a national disgrace, with Johnson remarking that 22 years later it remains a disgrace. Speaking on the day that grouse shooting season starts, Alison Johnson said, "Recent events, including the reported disappearance of a golden eagle on a grouse moor and the poisoning of a sea eagle, are shocking, but sadly far from rare. Scotland should be a haven for wildlife. It should not be a haven for wildlife crime." The First Minister described wildlife crime as a priority for the police, but it's clear that greater action is required by her government if we are to bring an end to raptor persecution in Scotland once and for all. Richard, is the Scottish Government doing enough to deal with the persecution of our raptor populations?
I think it's tried to take an approach which has involved the countryside community in that, and is particularly engaged with the gamekeepers and those who are responsible for looking after the land, and farming community as well. I mean, these are rare species. They have we want to preserve them. We don't want to see them die out. It's particularly distressing when it becomes obvious that a crime has been committed. When you find one of these birds and it's quite clear it's been poisoned or trapped. So I think it can sometimes be quite a hard crime to prove, but I think the Scottish Government has made it pretty clear to those who perpetrate those crimes that there are potentially there's potentially a harder set of legislation could come down the line if this behaviour doesn't stop, because really it doesn't serve anyone's interest for that. Scotland is there's a lot of managed landscapes in Scotland, but we need to be preserving those species. We have a duty of stewardship to preserve those species in the wild. And frankly, I struggle to understand the mentality of anyone who would try to kill off any of these birds. But I think that the consequences of the likelihood of being caught is maybe not as high as it should be, but the consequences of being caught are potentially very severe.
Yeah. Effie, as we said, this is the so-called glorious 12th, the day when grouse shooting begins in Scotland. Something like 16% of all the land in Scotland is used for grouse shooting. Is that something that we need to change?
Yes. is the short answer. Absolutely. Scotland has historically, and I'm actually, you're just catching me up. I'm just in the process of studying Sir Tom Devine's various very, very large corpus actually on Scotland, coming from the Middle Ages right through to the present day. So I'm very, very immersed in this discussion myself conceptually right in this moment. But land ownership is something that even going forward, be it as an independent country, hopefully, or whatever other format, this is something that we're going to have to discuss and understand better than we have done. One of the problems is that obviously, although Scottish history is now taught much better in schools than it was 30 or 40 years ago, it's still not fully analyzed in terms of what has happened as the nation was taken, colonized, exploited in different ways. In the social classes, once the English feudal system was imposed on Scotland, the outcomes and the consequences of that imposition. So land ownership is a very strange phenomenon in Scotland, be it a foreign registration of Scottish land or the idea of huge swathes of Scottish land owned by different individuals, by the Crown, under different jurisdictions and different dukes and lords of the land, and the system of tenure, and the impact this has on tenancy, on farming, and the ownership of land. So it's something that it has been developed as a hobby, if you like, as you said. We'll just go. Shooting is part of the nobility's leisurely activities. But I'm not quite sure that this is acceptable in the present day, both in its cultural, but also in its environmental impacts. So lots of food for thought there, and something to definitely to look into as a matter of urgency over the next few years.
Yeah. And finally tonight, Scottish Parliament Deputy Presiding Officer Linda Fabiani MSP has announced her decision not to seek re-election at next year's Holyrood elections. Ms Fabiani, who has been an ever-present member of the Scottish Parliament since it was reconvened in 1999, told her East Kilbride Constituency Association of her decision last night. Commenting on the decision, Ms Fabiani said, "I've been so privileged to serve in Scotland's democratically elected Parliament since it was reconvened in 1999. By the next election I will have served for more than 20 years, but I'll be 65 in 2021 and I feel I cannot make another 5-year commitment. There are many people in the SNP with great energy and commitment. I'm happy to step aside and let others take up the challenge and to deliver independence." Reflecting on her political career, Ms Fabiani said, "It was a massive privilege to have helped bring about and then be appointed to serve in the first ever SNP government in what was a whirlwind period of change. I've influenced policies that have a direct impact, and I hope my long-term work on equal rights for all, justice for survivors of institutional abuse, a better deal for carers, and a fairer system for victims of domestic abuse has helped people across the country." Richard, Linda Fabiani, obviously, she's been a great friend of Broadcasting Scotland, but she's been a real kind of figure in Scottish politics now for some time, as she said, an ever present, since the reconvening of the Scottish Parliament. How will Linda Fabiani be remembered for you?
For me, I think what I'll remember most about Linda, and she's still going to be around, I'm sure, just not in Holyrood. But it's her humanity, her warmth. I mean, she's just genuinely a lovely person, and a walk of life tends not to attract its share of lovely people. It has to be said sometimes. She just brought that humanity and that warmth to how she comported herself in the chamber, to everything she did. I mean, she was an absolutely excellent minister. I think she was a minister for external affairs as well. She brought a real touch to that, and I think you would struggle to find one in who either was in the Parliament, who served in any of the parliaments that Linda served in herself, who would have anything adverse to say about her. The other thing was she tried to raise Scotland's. She did a bit to raise Scotland's sights. I mean, she was always a very, very strong campaigner, for the forces of democracy in East Timor, for example. She was obviously very, very proud of her European heritage, her Italian roots. But she was also never frightened to get her sleeves rolled up as well. I mean, she was one of the people who was involved in the body that oversaw the construction of the Holyrood project and saw it through some pretty tough times in the early years of devolution. So, she's somebody who's put in a hell of a shift for her constituents, but also for Scotland. And I'll certainly miss her presence in the chamber. I'm not going to be the only person who misses that about her.
No. And Effie, just very quickly, your thoughts on Linda Fabiani as she announces her retirement from politics?
Well, I will echo every single thing that Rich has just mentioned, and also say that I had the good fortune of meeting her last year and shaking her hand in the building in the Parliament. I was given a sort of a private tour by one of the of her aides, and she just happened to be just walking past us, and she stopped, and I had the good fortune to sample and experience that humanity and that amazing smile and that warmth. So a pretty crazy thing to be doing now, Linda, because you're too young to say that you're too old to be there. But you know what I mean. But anyway, all the best to her, and I hope that we'll, in some capacity or other, we'll get a lot more of her, because people like her are needed.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as I said, Linda Fabiani has been a huge supporter of Broadcasting Scotland, and I certainly hope she won't be so retired from politics that we can't drag her back into the studio at some point soon to talk. But that is just about all we have time for tonight. So once again, I'd like to thank Richard Thomson MP and Effie Samara for joining us, and thank you at home for joining us as well. We do have to ask, if you're able to support us, please do go to broadcastingscotland.scot/register. Sign up there as a supporter, and your £5 a month makes a big difference to what we're able to achieve here at Broadcasting Scotland. If you're not able to support us financially, you can still do us a turn. You can follow us on Twitter at Broadcast Scot. You can find us on Facebook and on YouTube. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel, like the videos, share them around, let people know why you support Broadcasting Scotland, and hopefully your recommendations will encourage them to give us a try, and we can help to grow. You can help to grow our audience that way. And finally, if you'd like to get involved here at Broadcasting Scotland, we are always telling you there are opportunities here for you to learn all kinds of things about TV production. We'd love to get more people involved, so do please get in touch if you have any interest in working behind the camera or in front of the camera. We'd love to have you. So that is just about all we have time for. Gordon will be back tomorrow with Scotland at 7. I'll be back on Friday with a very special episode of Scotland at 7. We've just been able to confirm that Peter Gagan, the author of Democracy for Sale, editor at the Open Democracy, one of the founding members of the Ferret, the Scottish investigative news reporting organisation, we're looking forward to talking to him about his book, Democracy for Sale, and also about his work in building some new media journalism in Scotland. We're sure he's got lots of tips for us here at Broadcasting Scotland. But that is absolutely all we have time for. So thank you once again to Effie and to Richard for joining us. Thank you as well, and have a great evening. Good night.